Life is hard. Leadership is hard. Certainly can be. But the complication is we make it harder than it needs to be. We add things on for a variety of reasons. We don't really mean to do that. And the cost of that is that we start to burn out and we still haven't achieved the results that we want to, the right results, the things that we're highly driven to do and that we feel, would be the right things to do. And so my position is we can make a different choice, that we can actually construct systems that make the essential things the easiest things to do in our lives. So then we can do them consistently and we can then achieve breakthrough results, but without burning out.
Hey, podcast family, and welcome to episode number 289 of the L3 Leadership Podcast, where we are obsessed with helping you grow to your maximum potential and to maximize the impact of your leadership. My name is Doug Smith, and I am your host, and today's episode is brought to you by my friends at Baritone Advisors. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and I hope that you'll enjoy our content and become a subscriber. And if you've been listening to us for a while, thank you so much. And just make sure that you're subscribed so you get all of our content up to date. And it would mean the world to me if you would share this podcast with others or leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. That really does help us grow our audience and reach more leaders. So thank you in advance for that. In today's episode, you'll hear my conversation with Greg McKeown. Greg is a speaker, a best-selling author, and host of the popular podcast, What's Essential? He has been covered by the New York Times, Fast Company, Fortune, Politico, and others. He has been interviewed on NPR, NBC, Fox, and The Steve Harvey Show, and he is among the most popular bloggers for LinkedIn. He is also the Young Global Leader for the World Economic Forum, and his New York Times bestselling book, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less, has sold more than 1 million copies worldwide. He's originally from London, England, and he now lives in California with his wife, Anna, and their 4 children. And in our interview, we'll take a deep dive into his new book, which is called Effortless, and we talk all about getting into an effortless state, which was extremely insightful for me, creating effortless action, and ultimately producing effortless results. And I think you're going to love this conversation. And we also take Greg through the lightning round, of course. So before we dive into the interview, just a few announcements. This episode of the podcast is sponsored by my friends at Baritone Advisors. The financial advisors at Baritone Advisors help educate and empower clients to make informed financial decisions. You can find out how Baritone Advisors can help you develop a customized financial plan for your financial future by visiting their website at baritoneadvisors.com. That's BERATUNG advisors.com. Securities and investment products and services offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA and SIPC. Baritone Advisors, LPL Financial, and L3 Leadership are separate entities. I also want to thank our sponsor, Henny Jewelers. They're a jeweler owned by my friend and mentor, John Henny. My wife, Laura, and I got our engagement and wedding rings at Henny Jewelers, and we just loved our experience. And not only do they have great jewelry, but they also invest in people. In fact, every couple that comes in engaged to their store, they give them a book to help them prepare for their marriage, and we just love that. So if you're in need of a good jeweler, check out hennyjewelers.com. And with all that being said, let's dive right in. Here's my conversation with Greg McKeown. Well, Greg, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. It's an honor to have this time with you. And why don't we just start off with you just telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
My name is Greg McKeown. I'm the host of the What's Essential podcast and the author of a couple of books, Effortless, and before that, a book called Essentialism. My goal is really to help successful people become very successful and to avoid some of the errors that I found in my research that keeps otherwise successful people from breaking through to their highest point of contribution.
Yeah, and you wrote Essentialism, and if you're listening to this and you haven't read that book, can't encourage you enough to do that. And that kind of went worldwide. I mean, it's had over 1 million copies sold, and you went all over the world talking about that. And then you have a follow-up book, which you just wrote and just mentioned, called Effortless, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. And so let's just dive right into that. You know, I'm curious, why did you write this book, and what do you want people to get out of it?
Well, I mean, I wrote it because I think a lot of people find themselves, maybe they're a certain level of success that keeps them from breaking through to a higher level of success. And in this case, one of the problems is that if you focus on the essentials, which I, of course, am a big subscriber to, but you find yourself still with too many responsibilities or still not making enough progress, what's happening is that you run out of space. And I think a lot of people that read what I write are in that category. They're highly driven, they're highly engaged, they're working hard, they're talented. You know, they've got a lot of things going for them, but it leads them to a point where they say, well, where do I go from here? I can't actually work any harder, but they still want to make a higher contribution. So what do you do in that circumstance? And so I found myself in that sort of situation, and it set me out on a quest to try and work out how in this case, I could try to get a higher return on effort. We've heard of ROI, but this is ROE, the return on effort. How can you use your effort in a certain way? Because that's a pretty limited thing, what you have, the amount of effort you have. If you're already someone who's putting in effort, very hardworking, what can you do to be able to use that effort to be able to get a far higher return on investment? And that's really what Effortless is about.
Yeah, and it's really, really interesting. You shared this in the book, but I want to hear you talk about it. We've all heard the illustration of big rocks, and you put the big rocks in the container, right, and we're supposed to focus on big rocks. And we've heard that, and you can reiterate the illustration, but you brought up a question I never thought about before I thought was so profound. You just said, well, what if there's too many big rocks? And the assumption is that there's enough big rocks to just focus on what we're supposed to focus on, but that's not always true. And so can you just talk about that and what you would tell leaders who are focusing on too many big rocks? What would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I mean, this is just to reiterate the metaphor. I'm sure people are familiar with it, but if you take a container, you've got sand, that's like the trivial stuff in your life. It's not important. It's the social media. It's ESPN, too much of the time. It's endless email. A lot of email isn't very valuable. And then you've got small rocks, and they represent, the good things. They're somewhat important, but they're not really going to move the needle. And then you've got big rocks, the most essential things. Those are your most, your health. It's your most important relationships. It's the projects that are going to move the needle. And the idea is, if you get the order wrong, you put the small things in, then, the sand, small rocks, and big rocks, they don't fit geometrically. If you take the same size container and you put in the big rocks first, then the small rocks, then the sand, then they fit. And it's quite a clever analogy. But I found myself, as you already put it, saying, well, but what if you have too many big rocks? I was the father of Essentialism, but also the father now to 4 children. I'm traveling all over the place. I've got lots of responsibilities. I'm being more selective than I've ever been in my whole life, but I still feel this sense of running out of space. And so and in the midst of that, then had a family emergency where one of my daughters became very unexpectedly and severely sick with an undiagnosed neurological condition. She goes from picture of health to sort of total loss of personality, and she's becoming increasingly comatose and on the way to falling fully into a coma. I mean, this is the journey that she's on, and that again then pushes you beyond what you have capacity for. And so one of the things that I then wanted to, that journey led me down a path that now I've codified and written in the book, but for how you can achieve more with your current level of effort, or even sometimes how you can accomplish more with even less effort. And it's in that sense that I mean effortless. There are ways that you can use your effort more efficiently. There are ways that you can use your effort to build systems that produce results for you. There's a whole variety of things you can do. And really, my experiences with this were my fire for the deed. But now my fire has changed. It's to be able to help other people who themselves find themselves overloaded, maybe teetering on the edge of exhaustion, despite the fact that they're putting in so much effort and so much time and so much energy.
Yeah. And, you have things come up like what you went through with your daughter, and, life still demands that we show up. Life still demands that we produce. And so I'm really curious for you to dive into this. And, when we have so much and we don't handle this well and don't learn how to get into, as you share in the book, an effortless state, effortless actions, and effortless results, burnout can come to us very, very quickly. And you made a statement that I love. You said, burnout is not a badge of honor. And I just want to hear you talk about this. What have you learned about burnout and leadership, and how can leaders avoid it?
Yeah, I mean, look, life is hard. Leadership is hard. Certainly can be. But the complication is we make it harder than it needs to be. We add things on for a variety of reasons. We don't really mean to do that. And the cost of that is that we start to burn out, and we still haven't achieved the results that we want to, the right results, the things that we're highly driven to do and that we feel, would be the right things to do. And so my position is we can make a different choice, that we can actually construct systems that make the essential things the easiest things to do in our lives. So then we can do them consistently and we can then achieve breakthrough results, but without burning out. But that's the context. I mean, that's sort of the case that I'm trying to make in this book.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned in getting into an effortless state around that is you said that you talk about the art of rest and that relaxing is a responsibility. How can leaders learn to relax? We have so many emotional burdens. I thought this was fascinating. I was listening to your interview with Tim Ferriss as well. Just the tool that emotional burdens and grievances have on our lives and our impact to be effective. What do you have to say about leaders and rest and letting go of burdens and grievances and grief in their life?
Yeah, I mean, look, a lot of people live in what I would call a state of suffering. And so that's where they're holding grudges, holding a lot of fear, some anger, all these things, physical exhaustion, we're holding that burden as well. So we start to not see things clearly. And so that state makes everything harder. That's just burdens we're carrying before we start on even the first action or project that we're trying to actually make progress on. So that just makes everything harder in our lives. What the good news is that behind all of that, if you can remove those things, you find the effortless state. It's there behind all of those burdens. And so learning to remove those burdens is the ultimate productivity hack. You mentioned Tim Ferriss, and when I asked him that question, I said, well, look, what percentage of your mental capacity were you investing in just managing your own grudges and anger? And he said, well, between the age of, let's say, 15 and 30, he said it's probably 60 to 70% of my mental and emotional energy were being consumed with that. That's why it's such an unbelievable hack, because if you can get that much of your intelligence that's been consumed over here suddenly back, I mean, it's like the ultimate rebate. Suddenly we're like, okay, I can invest all of that on the actual work itself. Yeah. So that's why I structured the book the way I did. It's Effortless State is part 1, Effortless 2, as you mentioned, is Effortless Action, and then part 3 is Effortless Results. State, action, results. And the reason is because that's, in a way, that's kind of the heavy lifting. If you can remove all of that, suddenly when you come to the task itself, you bring your full supercomputer level of intelligence and ability to the table, instead of, in his case, only a third of it is actually making its way to the table. So that's why the specific thing that he and I talked about a lot was a section of the book about firing our grudges, playing off of a Clayton Christensen question, what's the job to be done? When people hire a grudge, they're hiring a grudge to do something for them. You hire a grudge, you hire a grudge because you believe, well, maybe a grudge will make me powerful. Now I'm going to hold this on, on someone else. It gives me a sense of superiority, one-upmanship. Look at this bad thing they did and I'll hold them to it. Maybe we hire a grudge because it produces sympathy in people we talk to, and that has advantages. They want to look after us, take care of us, just emotionally sympathize with us, and so on. There's a variety of things we could hire a grudge to do. But if you actually think about it like a job performance evaluation, you can start saying, actually, the grudge does not perform well in what we're hiring it to do. It doesn't make us powerful as we think it will. Actually, it controls us. The grudge is in charge. It makes us far weaker. Does it actually produce sympathy in others? Yes, but it's a really limited sympathy. And one of the reasons we know that is because we have to keep finding new people to tell our story of woe to, because it fatigues them. And so it's a limited value even there. And so as you evaluate grudges, you can start to say, I'm just going to get rid of this. And as anyone knows who has forgiven someone who's let go of one of these burdens, followed a process for doing that, you suddenly are in feel so much lighter.
Yes.
And it's not just a one-time benefit, because as you remove that, that's a cumulative benefit, that every day afterwards you're lighter, and you have that rebate, not just for a day or for a month, you have it for like the rest of your life that would have been used up in this way. So it's, I think sometimes people, when they think about this book, maybe they come to it and they just want, okay, give me the practical stuff. How can I make the action easier? And they might be right about that. That's sort of part 2 in the book. Yeah. But I felt convinced, as I worked with people and have worked with them over the last years and years now on applying essentialism, that this really is vital. That there's just this tremendous amount of energy and resources before any kind of productivity or efficiency hack. This is low-hanging fruit. If we work on this, it helps us, as I said, to achieve what we came here to do, instead of wasting our precious life's blood, on things that just distract us and consume us and take us away from that mission.
That's so good. And could you repeat one more time just the question that you asked Tim about how much capacity he gave to that? Because I think that's a question that every leader needs to reflect on almost daily.
I think the way I said it was just what percentage of your mental and emotional capability is being used up for processing grudges and anger. And he said 60, 70%. I thought that was very high. But then I was just on the interview, I think it was the School of Greatness podcast, and the host there, I think he said it was like higher for him for years. I think he said like 80 to 90%. Yeah. He said it almost was, for him, he said it's what kind of drove him in a lot of ways towards certain directions and certain action. And I said, yeah, you were using bad fuel.
Yeah.
And he really related that. He's like, yeah, if you use bad fuel, it can make progress for you, but there's all sorts of costs that are hidden, unintended consequences. It's damaging you. It's damaging relationships. It's certainly removing your joy in the journey. And it just overall makes everything harder than it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I first heard that, I started reflecting on my life, and I would probably say 60 to 70% as well. And not just grudges and anger. I think back to my, 18 to 23, how much time I spent worrying, specifically on the relationship side. Am I ever going to get married? Am I going to marry this girl? And I always tell people, if you could go back and read my journals from 18 to 23, literally every journal entry is something about worrying. And then, I had a leadership issue with another leader in my mid 20s. And then I just spent, 7 to 10 years basically just trying to prove myself and swinging so far into the performance pendulum, again, being fueled by the wrong thing. And I just think back to now, I feel like I'm in a healthier place. If I had just been in a healthy place and dealt with some of those issues early on, how much healthier could I be? How much more if I could produce in a good way? So leader, again, I just want to reiterate, go back and rewind the past 5-10 minutes, ask yourself that question, and ask yourself that question today. Are you putting energy into things that you shouldn't be today, and learn to fire those grudges? I love that.
Just building on that is a story that I came across in the research on this book that I loved, that has a kind of leadership question attached to it. But the story is of a woman, mother, who's with her dying son in the hospital, and she knows it's at the end. And you can tell sometimes at the end. I've been in moments like that with people. Sometimes you just know they're breathing and so on. And so she knew, and so she got up in the bed next to him just to kind of be close to him at the end. And then it got to this point where he is sort of between, he's not fully here, but he's not fully there yet. He's in that in-between, and he just opens his eyes and he says, "Oh, Mom, it's all so simple. It's all so simple." And those were his last words, and he died. And that offers us a mantra, an insight to her for the rest of her life, and also to us if we want to learn it now rather than later. And the question I think that goes with it for leaders is, what am I making harder than it needs to be? What am I making harder than it needs to be in my life right now?
A lot. That's probably the answer for a lot of leaders. Leaders, I just want to encourage you to camp here and again, get the book. And again, I love what you said. Everyone wants to jump into how do I get results? I want effortless results. But if we don't take care of our state and get into an effortless state, we'll never produce what we could produce. And so I do want to go into hacks because obviously I love hacks. You love hacks. I want to talk a little bit about effortless action. Do you have something?
Can I make that distinction? Please. There? The why, the order.
Yeah.
You have finite effort. If you use up all of your effort on being in a state of suffering, of complaint, of worry, of fear, and so on, there won't be enough left for you to be able to figure out the path of effortless action. There just won't be enough effort remaining to be able to figure that out. And then the same is true for going from effortless action to effortless results. Effortless results has a particular meaning to it, a clear definition, and it's to do with creating systems that don't just produce one result for you one time, but produce results again and again and again. That's really the sum and bonum of effortless thinking, is that you set the system up once and it can return to you once, twice, 100 times. People think I'm exaggerating, but if the system works well, it can be 1,000 times. Or even perpetually. So the reward is so much higher once you get there, but you don't have the mental space and capacity if your state is fully cluttered. If the way you're doing your daily actions right now are the hard way, the burdened way, the overcomplicated, the perfectionist way, there won't be the capacity, you won't have the buffer necessary to build systems. And a lot of people feel that. I mean, what that looks like is simple, which is you're just reactive all the time. Wow. It's so reactive, there's no space to find a better way to do the work of the day. And there's no space in your calendar or in your mind, resources at the end of the day to try and design systems that work for you. And so you're just left forever to keep on surviving and reacting and surviving and reacting. And that's where a lot of leaders get stuck. And so that's why, again, it's first, you start getting this huge effort rebate, and you use that to figure out step 2, which is effortless action. But really, the magic is when you get so clear in your state, your action is so efficient that you have extra space to build systems. That is where the magic happens. I'm sure we'll get there at some point.
Yeah, no, that's so powerful. And as we move into effortless action, so many practical things in this section. We don't have time to go over them all. One thing I love when you're talking about goals, everyone always thinks about SMART goals, but I thought you had a very simple question for how to set goals. And that's just, what does done look like? Can you expand on that question?
Yeah, I've used that. You would think that maybe you don't have to have leaders ask that question, because it's not like it's so simple of a question, but actually I found you do. And I found that even after somebody has heard the question or even been reminded of it, they will then, on the very next project they're working on, not define what done looks like. And so they've got all these tasks and all these projects and responsibilities, and they just have a sense of expansion and vagueness. And it's just, you can't be done with something you don't actually know what done looks like. You have to actually have a parameter to get it over the line. And so it's a simple idea. You just, instead of saying, I want to lose weight, you say, what does done look like? A very precise answer. Well, let me stand on the scale and I'll see 177 pounds looking back at me. That is done. And you'll know when you're done. That's the moment. And so it creates a very powerful direction for all of your other behavior. It gives your mind a concrete target to start adjusting behavior in order to bring that future result about. It's the same for everything else. Okay, you want to finish I want to write a book. That's not quite right. What does done look like? Done looks like my editor has emailed me to say, I love everything in this book. It is great. It's accepted. And to know that's the precise moment you're targeting helps you to be able to, again, efficiently declutter all the other options. So I do find the question, what does done look like, to be an accelerate, like just a hugely decluttering question.
Yeah. And once we answered that question, you talk about asking, what are the minimum steps required for completion? You actually shared a story about Steve Jobs. I would love for you to share again about, basically, I think you called it step zero.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy I want to write a book. Oh man, what are all the steps I have to, you could go crazy, even if you know what done looks like.
Yeah, that's right. Because it's the same idea. You can say what doesn't look like, but then you can still over-engineer, overcomplicate your way there to such an extent that you maybe never get there. And so the example you're referring to is when Apple had gone out to find a DVD burning company. So this is when DVD burning was new, and so it's very industry specific technology. And you might pay $60,000 for a single DVD burning machine.
Wow.
And so they purchase this company that's on the cutting edge of this, and they go to them and say, listen, what we really want to do, we want to use your software, and we want you to try and simplify it so that it can come as standard on the Mac. And so they have, I think there's a couple of weeks to try and simplify what they currently have to be able to work in that way. Now, just for context, this machine they have and the software with it came with a 1,000-page manual, which is sort of unthinkable now because we don't learn technology in using manuals. It's an iterative process. But they spent this time preparing for this meeting with Steve by taking that 1,000-page manual and simplifying it. Let's remove this functionality. Let's take that thing and the other thing. And obviously that is a good idea if you're trying to simplify. But when Steve came into the meeting, what he said, look, forget all that. He drew it on the whiteboard, rectangle. We're going to drag to one button. And you just drag it to it. And when you've dragged it in there, you click burn. That's the app we're going to build. And at that moment, the founders of this company who are sitting in there trying, and the engineers who are waiting to do their presentation suddenly become embarrassed of their presentation. They never did give it. They're like, we were so proud of it before, we're embarrassed of it now. Why? And this was their learning, was Steve wasn't taking complexity and removing something. He was starting from ultimate simplicity, which is zero. Start from zero and saying, what are the minimum number of steps to achieve the result? Can you achieve the outcome you want in a single step? And if it's not one step, can you do it then in 2 steps? And you start from zero and make every step justify itself. Because no matter how simple you make a single step, having no step is still easier. It still requires less effort. And so you want ultimate efficiency, you want total frictionless experience if you can have it. And that's what they created in that app.
Yeah, the third principle I'd love to hear you talk about when it came to effortless action is establishing upper and lower bounds. I thought this was so good. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's basically asking what is the gradual pace that will get me where I'm going? What's the effortless pace? One of the stories that people may be familiar with, but I went back and read the primary accounts. And this is of the race to the poles, where you've got Captain Scott from Great Britain and Roald Amundsen, the last Viking, as he was known, from Norway. They're both trying to get to the South Pole. They take 2 totally different approaches. So they set off on almost the same day, same distance, same weather conditions. So it's a really interesting comparison. The first team, Captain Scott, would push as far as he possibly could on the good weather days. So they sort of pushed to exhaustion on those days. And then the bad days, they just so worn out, they couldn't make 1 inch progress. And they were also emotionally fatigued. So they would just be sitting around complaining. They'd be writing in their journals. So we have those accounts of just saying, oh, we cannot believe the bad luck we have. We have the worst weather conditions of anybody who's ever tried this. And actually it wasn't true at all. Their weather was better than those that they'd learned from. But they felt like it was worse. They were in that kind of state. And meanwhile, the other team takes a completely different approach. They have an upper bound and a lower bound. And that was 15 miles a day. Every single day we're going 15 miles. On the good days, we're going 15 miles. That's the upper bound, because you're saying we could go more, but we're not going to. Why? Because then on the bad weather days, we also want to try and get to about 15 miles. So maybe they go 13 miles, but there's not much range difference between good and bad. And so they just steady. The plot thickens when they get to within 45 miles of the South Pole. They don't know where the competitor team is. They're like, they could be 2 days away. They could be 1 day away. We have no idea where they are. And if we pushed now, we could get to the pole within 1 day. The perfect weather conditions, 45 miles. If they push themselves now, if they violate their bounds, they'll still make it there. And they'll be the first team in human history to achieve this goal. And still they don't. Still they take 3 days, averaging 15 miles for the last 3 days. They just maintained that pace. What's amazing about that story? Well, the outcome's important. The Amundson's team is the first team to ever do it. They're successful. They make it the 16,000 miles home back to Norway. They won. The other team is 30 days late. They're so exhausted on the way home that they all die. So none of them make it home. And we just have their journal records to explain, the differences in their approach. When you read one of the chief biographers' accounts of Roald Amundsen, they say they achieved their goal. By the way, this has not been achieved in all of human history. Everybody has failed who's ever tried. Not the Vikings, they didn't achieve it. Not the British Empire and all its military naval power. No one has ever done it. It's the most extreme test that imaginable. That's why it captured people's imagination so much. They say, this is the phrase from the account, they achieved their objective, phrase, without particular effort. I think that's amazing. That's like breathtaking to me. Because how can it be true? How can that possibly be true? And yet that's the description, without particular effort. Of course, they were putting in effort, but it wasn't an experience of crisis after crisis. It wasn't pushing to the point of self-destruction and then crashing and so on. It wasn't boom and bust. It was paced. And similarly in our lives, if we set a goal, whatever it is, okay, I'm going to take up swimming. I just recently did. I'm not going to swim more than this much per day, but not less than this. And you create a range. Why? Because you want to be in it for the long run. All the benefits are cumulative. So you need to create it so that you can do it easily today and tomorrow and the next day. You want to be doing it in months from now and years from now, not go so hard day one and day two that you just give up. And that's what most people do with human performance. They're intermittent. And so the results are like Captain Scott's team. It's just like boom and bust, and it's much slower to make progress in that way.
So fascinating. And it really sounds like, by establishing upper and lower bounds, they put themselves in the right effortless state on a daily basis, right? And so
yeah, I think there is a sort of synergy between state, action, and results. Whereas in the book, I emphasize it as concentric circles. One leads to the other. I definitely think the deeper you get into them, the deeper you go, this is all just a way of operating, a way of being, and they feed each other. I completely agree with that.
Yeah. And like you said earlier, I even with the book got excited about action, results, but really the most powerful part of the book for me, because it was probably the part I neglected the most, was the state. And so powerful. I am curious, you said you're taking up swimming. Is there a goal attached to that? Do you want to do like an Ironman, or are you just...
No, every so often I do think about doing like an Ironman and maybe doing it with my son, but I don't know that it's a necessary goal at this point. So it's really what we're going for, what I'm going for in my life, and what Anna and I are going for with our children too, is lifelong, right? Whatever it is, just put lifelong before it. We want lifelong learners.
Wow.
Oh, great. You got an A in that class. And we want to celebrate anything, but like if that's the focus, that's not the focus. We want, most of what I have learned in my life has not been in my formal education, right? I've learned vastly more outside of my formal education than in, and I'm fully in favor of formal education. I've invested a lot of time, money in that, but it's that lifelong pursuit. Same for athleticism. To say, okay, well, they were high school. They were amazing in high school. Even go to college, the college level athlete with this, fine. But what matters isn't that. It's having, they're 60 years old and they're 70 years old and they're still doing these things because they enjoy them and it's good for the longevity. Help them have habits that let them live to be 100. It seems to me a better investment than, sometimes the professionalism of sports, I think has a lot of unintended consequences that aren't lifelong. objectives aren't sustainable success. I was just on a plane before the pandemic with an NFL player, and he was just telling me about his experiences there. And he basically just said, look, everybody comes out of the NFL angry, bitter, broken, and broke.
Wow.
He said, that's what happens. Of course, I'm sure that is not true for every single person. It doesn't seem to be true for him. But he's like, I'm doing all sorts of things to make sure I'm not I'm an exception to the rule. And so what an oddity that if you get it to the very pinnacle of the current athletic system, you're going to be broke and broken and bitter. I mean, like that tells you everything that's wrong about intermittent performance. You want sustainable performance. You want to be able to do it for a very long period of time. And so that's my primary goal. When I, coming back to your specific answer, it's like I want to just be swimming, as long as I'm alive. I want to play tennis. One of the reasons I love tennis, I'm not particularly good, but I like playing it because I enjoy it myself. But I also, as I'm seeing other people play, I see people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, literally out there playing, and I'm like, well, okay, good. So this is something you can do for the long run. I'm interested in that kind of success.
Wow. I mean, that might be a perfect tie into, the last section of the book. And for time's sake, I'll really just leave you go where you want to go when it comes to effortless results. But I love just thinking about automating in every area of your life so you can get compounded results. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, this, like I said before, this is really the magic. The other two create space for you to have effort left to be able to build systems in your life. And that's a slightly rarer benefit, because if you are so consumed with surviving, you can't then look at your life. So people are so busy living, they're not looking at their life. So busy doing, they're not building, designing life to work for them and stacking the decks in their favor. So there's this huge difference. And I have succeeded in some important ways in doing this, but it's almost like I've succeeded just enough to see how much I haven't done. And the enormous opportunity that exists in building systems that produce results for you rather than you. So linear results, right? That's like basic return on effort. You do one thing today and you get the result today. And tomorrow you're going to have to start again. If you don't put in the effort tomorrow, you're not going to get the result tomorrow. So it's one in, one out. And let's think about my friend Jessica Jackley. When she was in Africa, she's trying to make a difference there. She comes across an entrepreneur who is in subsistence level existence. She is putting in the effort today to provide for her family by selling produce on the side of the road. And she will make just enough to feed herself and her children to stay alive. So subsistence. It just me. And then tomorrow, if she doesn't do it, she has to be there tomorrow. If she's not there tomorrow, they aren't going to eat. And it's obviously a huge problem. So Jessica starts looking and she says, well, look, is there a way that I could help her improve the system of her life? What would it take? And they work out together that for $500, they could build a system. And the system is, she would go and meet with the farmers themselves, the fishermen, and construct a delivery mechanism so that she isn't buying it from a middleman who takes all the profit out of the equation. And so suddenly she'll have a profit. And if she has a profit, then again, she's got now buffer and space to be able to build a better system. So that $500 will be a game changer for her. So that's like level one. If Jessica, which she can, gets $500 to give to her, she helps this entrepreneur achieve effortless results that flow to her, or more effortless at least. But then she gets a second thought. She goes one step further. She said, what if we could construct a system to produce these micro loans So instead of me giving $500 one time, helping this person change their life, what if we constructed a system? So it's like a system on system story here, because what she does there, she says, well, what if we could create a platform, a website where people who care like I do could put in a small amount of money, make a microloan, and that money would go out and it gets repaid into that bank, basically. They called it Kiva, kiva.org.
Yeah.
Many people are familiar with it already. But look at the difference. $500 versus now Kiva has successfully done $1.3 billion in loans. And that's the difference. Now, earlier on, I said, if you build systems, you can end up with 10 times, 100 times, even 1,000 times return on your effort. And that sounds like hyperbole. But what else is it? If you go from $500 to 1.3 billion, it actually is a factor far higher than it's much more than 1,000. So what is it? So we're talking like a 2 million times more effective than giving that $500 and saying we're done. That's what systems do. So that's really the breakthrough idea, is to construct your life in such a way that you build systems that make results flow to you. Writing a book at all, writing Effortless is like this. I mean, so you put in the effort up front. I'm going to put effort in every day regardless to something. I could use it just teaching one person at a time. Or you can write. I mean, writing is a massively high leverage tool, for sure it is. Publishing a book, high leverage. It became a New York Times bestseller already. That's amazing to me. That's nothing old about that, right? It reaches already huge numbers of people, and already in it's going out already in more than 20 languages.
Wow.
That's, you write it once and it's leveraged all over the place. People are emailing within the first couple of days. I've already listened to it twice. I've already read it twice. I don't know who those people are. They're doing that while I'm sleeping. I mean, literally. So,
yeah.
So what do you call that? What else can you call that if you are asleep and the result is flowing to you? What else is that but effortless? What other word could you use? It's not exaggerating.
Right.
That is flowing to you. You are not doing anything. And of course, that can happen for years and years. It could happen even after, the death test is a good test on how well you've built a system. If you died, would the system work? The system can work perfectly well without you. If I died today, Essentialism and Effortless would continue. To me, that's another example of an effortless result. So there's so much more opportunity for this. And my investment, where I focus is working out how to build better systems.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for this conversation today. It's been rich. Thank you for writing the book. I mentioned several times how it's impacted me already, and I know it's going to impact everyone that's listening to this. I know you mentioned you have your own podcast, the Get Essential podcast. People can get the book. Anything else you want to leave leaders with today?
No, thank you for mentioning. Go subscribe to the What's Essential podcast. I mean, that's where we're having these conversations. It's terrific to do it. If people want to take a 21-day challenge, Essentialism challenge, with small ways to make it more effortless to do what is really important, they can do that by going to essentialism.com. If they purchase Effortless, then they can access, I think, still for free by the publisher. It's a masterclass. Those are two places with tools to help people to really start putting these systems in place.
All right. Well, thanks again for your time, Greg, today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, hey, leader, thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Greg. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. You can find ways to connect with him and links to everything that we discussed in the show notes at l3leadership.org/289. And as always, leader, I want to challenge you that if you want to 10x your growth this year, then you need to either launch or join an L3 Leadership Mastermind Group. Mastermind groups have been the greatest source of growth in my life over the past 6 years. And if you're unfamiliar with what they are, they're simply groups of 6 to 12 leaders that meet together on a consistent basis for at least 1 year in order to help each other grow, achieve their goals, hold each other accountable, and to do life together. So if you're interested in learning more about a mastermind group, go to l3leadership.org/masterminds. And as always, I like to end every episode with a quote, and today I'll quote Gerald Brooks. He said this. He said, "It's not as important to me that people always agree with me, but rather that they know I love them even when they don't agree." And if our culture's ever needed a quote, it's that. So hey, I hope this episode encouraged you. Laura and I love you. We believe in you. Don't quit. Keep leading. Keep making a difference. And we will talk to you next episode.